Evening. For a few years now, I think we've been partnering with I'm Nadine Schmidt from the theater program at SMSU, if you don't know me. And for a few years now, we've been partnering with both the Marshall Lyon County Library and with McFarland Library on the SMSU campus on readings in honor of National Library Week. And so that's what this event tonight is. We're doing a reading here tonight and then another one tomorrow at noon with a slightly different slate of readers based on availability in the Whipple Gallery inside the McFarland Library on SMSU's campus. The theme for tonight's reading is Other Places, Other Times, Other Worlds. And so everyone's going to be reading from a book that they chose because when they read it, it transports them into another life and another experience. And we have a variety of different kinds of books, fiction and nonfiction, and different types of fiction. So I hope that you will enjoy it and maybe find a new book that you think I just must read that. So I will sit down and we'll let the first reader come up. Please just yes, I'll read my first introduction.
My name is Sarai Chido. I'm a double major in English Literature and Theater at SMSU. I love England, and this book takes place in England, first in London, and then on the Isle of Guernsey. It's called the Guernsey Literary and Pie Society. That's very exciting. It's also currently a Netflix original, but I read the book first, so I wrote first. So the Guernsey Literary and Pie Society is about a book club that started during and because of the German occupation of the British Isles. And this book is really fun because it's written as a bunch of letters to and from the people. And so I will read two letters from it. Following the World War II, one of the founding members reaches out to a journalist in London. Dear Miss Ashton, my name is Dawsey Adams, and I live on my farm in St. Martin's Parish on Guernsey. I know of you because I have an old book that once belonged to you, The Selected Essays of Elijah, by an author whose name in real life was Charles Lamb. Your name and address were written inside the front cover. I will speak plain. I love Charles Lamb. My own book says selected, so I wondered if that meant he had written other things to choose from. These are the pieces I want to read. And though the Germans are gone now, there aren't any bookshops left on Guernsey. I want to ask a kindness of you. Could you send me the name and address of a bookshop in London? I would like to order more of Charles Lamb's writings by post. I would also like to ask if anyone has ever written his life story, and if they have, could a copy be found for me? For all his bright and turning mind, I think Mr. Lamb must have had a great sadness in his life. Charles Lamb made me laugh during the German occupation, especially when he wrote about the roast pig. The Guernsey Literary and Pie Society came into being because of a roast pig we had to keep secret from the German soldiers, so I feel a kinship to Mr. Lamb. I am sorry to bother you, but I would be sorrier still not to know about him, as his writings have made me his friend. Hoping not to trouble you, Dawsey Adams. P.S. My friend Mrs. Maugery bought a pamphlet that once belonged to you too. It is called, Was There a Burning Bush? A Defense of Moses and the Ten Commandments. She liked your margarine note. Word of God or crowd control? Did you ever decide which? From Juliet to Dawsey. Dear Mr. Adams, I no longer live on Oakley Street, but I'm so glad that your letter found me and that my book found you. It was a sad wrench to part with the Selected Essays of Elijah. I had 2 copies in a dire need of shelf room, but I felt like a traitor selling it. You have soothed my conscience. I wonder how the book got to Guernsey. Perhaps there is some secret sort of homing instinct in books that brings them to their perfect readers. How delightful if that were true. Because there is nothing I would rather do than rummage through bookshops, I went at once to Hastings & Sons upon receiving your letter. I had gone to them for years, always finding the one book I wanted, and then 3 more that I hadn't known I wanted. I told Mr. Hastings he would like a good, clean copy, and not a rare edition, of more essays of Elijah. He will send it to you by separate post, invoice enclosed, and was delighted to know you were also a lover of Charles Lamb. He said the best biography of Lamb was by E.B. Lucas, and he would hunt out a copy for you, though it may take a while. In the meantime, will you accept this small gift from me? It is his selected letters. I think will tell you more about him than any biography ever could. Eating Lucas sounds too stately to include my favorite passage from Lamb. Buzz, 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 bum, 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 wheeze, 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 fen, 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 tinky, 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 crunch! I shall certainly come to be condemned at last. I have been drinking too much for 2 days running. I find my moral sense in the last stage of the consumption and my religion getting faint. You'll find that in the letters. It's on page 244. They were the first Lamb I ever read, and I'm ashamed to say I only bought the book because I'd read elsewhere that a man named Lamb had visited his friend Lee Hunt in prison for libelling the priest of the Lambs. While there, Lamb helped Hunt paint the ceiling of his cell sky blue with white clouds. Next they painted the rose trellis up one wall. Then, I further discovered, Lamb offered money to help Hunt's family outside the prison, though he himself was as poor as a man could be. Lamb also taught Hunt's youngest daughter to say the Lord's Prayer backward. You naturally want to learn everything you can about a man like that. That's what I love about reading. One tiny thing will interest you in a book, and that tiny thing will lead you on to another book, and another bit there will lead you on to a third book. It's geometrically progressive, all with no end in sight, for no other reason than sheer enjoyment. The red sand on the cover of that cover that looks like blood is blood. I got careless with my paper knife. The enclosed postcard is a reproduction of a painting of Lamb by his friend William Hazlitt. If you have time to correspond with me, could you answer several questions? 3, in fact. Why did a roast pig dinner have to be kept a secret? How could a pig cause you to begin a literary society? And most pressing of all, what is a potato pig pie? And why is it included in your society's name? I had sublet a flat at 223 Glove Place, Chelsea, London, SW3. My Oakley Street flat was bombed in 1945, and I still miss it. Oakley Street was wonderful. I could see the Thames out of 3 of my windows. I know that I am fortunate to have not any place at all to live in London, but I much prefer whining to counting my blessings. I am glad you thought of me to be your Elijah Hunton. Yours sincerely, Juliet Austin. Action. P.S. I never could make up my mind about Moses. It still bothers me.
I'm Mary Jean Porter, and I will be reading The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft. And so I believe this book really fits the theme for tonight's reading, just because it transports you to another place in time and also from space. This book is about an asteroid that lands somewhere in Massachusetts, and then it just begins poisoning the ground and the water and all of the vegetation around there. And then soon families are affected by this. And even on a nice, wonderful spring day, it's good to just crawl back into this dark little hole that H.P. Lovecraft has made. It happened in June, about the anniversary of the meteor's fall, and the poor woman screamed about things in the air which she could not describe. In her ravings, there was not a single specific noun, but only verbs and pronouns. Things moved and changed and fluttered, and ears tingled to impulses which were not wholly sounds. Something was taken away. She was being drained of something. Something was fastened itself onto her that ought not to be. Someone must make it off. Nothing was ever still in the night. The walls, the windows shifted. Nahum did not send her to the country's asylum, but let her wander about the house as long as she was harmless to herself and others. Even then, her expressions changed. He did nothing. But when the boys grew afraid of her, that Thaddeus nearly fainted at the way she made faces at him, he decided to keep her locked in the attic. By July, she had ceased to speak and crawled on all fours. Before that month was over, Nahum got the mad notion that she was slightly luminous in the dark, and he was now clearly saw that the case with the nearby vegetation. It was a little before this that the horses had stampeded. Something had aroused them in the night, and their neighing and kicking in their stalls had been terrible. There seemed virtually nothing to do to calm them. And when Nahum opened the stable door, they all bolted out like frightened woodland deer. It took a week to track all 4, and when they found them, they seemed to be quite useless and unmanageable. Something had snapped in their brains, and each one had been shot for its own good. Nahum borrowed a horse from Amy for his hay, but found it would not approach the barn. It shed, balked, and neighed, and whinnied. In the end, it could do nothing but drive it into the yard while the men used their own strength to keep the heavy wagon near enough the hayloft for convenient pitching. And all the while the vegetation was turning gray and brittle. Even the flowers, whose hues had been so strange, were graying now, and the fruit was coming out gray and dwarfed and tasteless. The asters and goldenrod bloomed gray and disordered, and the roses and zinnias and hollyhocks in the front yard were such blasphemous-looking things that Nahum's oldest brother Zenas cut them down. The strangely puffed insects died about that time, even the bees that had left their hives and taken to the woods. By September, all the vegetation was fast crumbling to a grayish powder, and Nahum feared that the trees would die before the poison was out of the soil. His wife now had spells of terrific screaming, and he and the boys were in a constant state of nervous tension. They shunned people now, and when school opened, the boys did not go. But it was Ammi, on one of his rare visits, who first realized that the well water was no longer good. It had an evil taste that was not exactly florid nor exactly salty, and Ammi advised his friends to dig another well on a higher ground to use till the soil was good again. Nahum, however, ignored the warnings, for he had, by that time, become callous to the strange and unpleasant things. He and the boys continued to use the tainted supply, drinking it listlessly and mechanically as they ate their ill-cooked meals and did their thankless and monotonous chores through the aimless days. There was something of a stolid resignation about them all, as if they walked half in their own world between lines of nameless guards to a certain and familiar doom.
Hello, I'm Paula Demas, and I cheated. I had lots of ideas, and then I latched onto an idea, and I couldn't find a book. And so that made me frustrated. But I thought, I can find something by this author here in the library. And the one I was looking for, of course, we didn't have. But one of my favorites was Ray Bradbury. This is his book, Dandelion Wine. And I wanted to read you the introduction because it talks about how he found his stories in his past. So it's called Just This Side of Byzantium, an introduction. This book, like most of my books and stories, was a surprise. I began to learn the nature of surprises, thank God, when I was fairly young as a writer. Before that, like every beginner, I thought you could beat, pummel, and thrash an idea into existence. Under such treatment, of course, any decent idea folds up its paws, turns on its back, fixes its eyes on eternity, and dies. It was with great relief then that in my early 20s I floundered into a word association process in which I simply got out of bed each morning, walked to my desk, and put down any word or series of words that happened along in my head. I would then take arms against the word, or for it, and bring on an assortment of characters to weigh the word and show me its meaning in my own life. An hour or 2 hours later, to my amazement, a new story would be finished and done. The surprise was total and lovely. I soon found that I would have to work this way for the rest of my life. First, I rummaged my mind for words that could describe my personal nightmares, fears of night and time from my childhood, and shape stories from these. Then, I took a long look at the green apple trees and the old house I was born in, and the house next door where lived my grandparents, and all the lawns of the summers I grew up in, and I began to try words for all that. What you have here in this book, then, is a gathering of dandelions from all those years. The wine metaphor, which appears again and again in these pages, is wonderfully apt. I was gathering images all of my life, storing them away and forgetting them. Somehow, I had to send myself back with words as catalysts to open the memories out and see what they had to offer. So, from the age of 24 to 36, hardly a day passed when I didn't stroll myself across a recollection of my grandparents' northern Illinois grass, hoping to come across some old half-burnt firecracker, a rusted toy, or a fragment of letter written to myself in some young year, hoping to contact the older person I became, to remind him of his past, his life, his people, his joys, and his drenching sorrows. It was a game that I took to with immense gusto, to see how much I could remember about dandelions themselves, or picking wild grapes with my father and brother, rediscovering the mosquito breeding ground rain barrel by the side bay window, or searching out the smell of the gold fuzzed bees that hung around our back porch grape arbor. Bees do have a smell, you know, and if they don't, they should, for their feet are dusted with spices from a million flowers. And then I wanted to call back what the ravine was like, especially on those nights when walking home late across town after seeing Lon Chaney's delicious fright, Phantom of the Opera. My brother Skip would run ahead and hide under the Ravine Creek Bridge like the lonely one, and leap out and grab me, shrieking, so I ran, fell, and ran again, gibbering all the way home. That was great stuff. Along the way, I came upon and collided, through word association, with old and true friendships. I borrowed my friend John Huff from my childhood in Arizona and shipped him east to Greentown so that I could say goodbye to him properly. Along the way, I sat me down to breakfasts, lunches, and dinners with the long dead and much loved, for I was a boy who did indeed love his parents and grandparents and his brother, even when his brother ditched him. And it goes on quite lovely. Two more.
Hello everyone, I'm Cassie Williams. I work at SMSU for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and Access, Opportunity, and Success. And so today I will be reading Kindred by Octavia Butler. And one of the reasons I chose this book is in high school I worked for the library, and the librarian that was in there at the time, she would always give me things to read. And if you haven't read the book, it takes place during modern times, and a woman transports back to the South during slavery. And so that's the basis, and she has to protect the slave owner's child. So she's constantly going back and forth protecting him. So. I bent to push him another box full, then straightened quickly as I began to feel dizzy, nauseated. The room seemed to blur and darken around me. I stayed on my feet for a moment, holding on to the bookcase and wondering what was wrong. Then finally, I collapsed to my knees. I heard Kevin make a wordless sound of surprise, heard him ask, "What happened?" I raised my head and discovered that I could not focus on him. "Something is wrong with me," I gasped. I heard him move toward me, saw a blur of gray pants and blue shirt. Then just before he would have touched me, he vanished. The house, the books, everything vanished. Suddenly, I was outdoors, kneeling on the ground beneath the trees. I was in a green place. I was at the edge of the woods. Before me was a wide, tranquil river, and near the middle of the river was a child splashing, screaming, drowning. I reacted to the child in trouble. Later, I could ask questions, try to find out where I was and what had happened. Now I went to help the child. I ran down to the river, waded into the water, fully clothed, and swam quickly to the child. He was unconscious. By the time I reached him, a small red-haired boy floating face down. I turned him over, got a good hold on him so that his head was above water, and told him in. There was a red-haired woman waiting for us on the shore now. Or rather, she was running back and forth, crying on the shore. The moment she saw that I was waiting, she ran out, took the boy from me, and carried him the rest of the way, feeling and examining him as she did. "He's not breathing," she screamed. Artificial respiration. I had seen it done been told about it, but I had never done it. Now was the time to try. The woman was in no condition to do anything useful, and there was no one else in sight. As we reached shore, I snatched the child from her. He was no more than 4 or 5 years old, and not very big. I put him down on his back, tilted his head back, and began mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I saw his chest move as I breathed into him. Then suddenly the woman began beating me. "You killed my baby," she screamed. "You killed him." I turned and managed to catch her pounding fist. "Stop it," I shouted, putting all the authority I could into my voice. "He's alive." Was he? I couldn't tell. Please, God, let him be alive. "The boy's alive. Now let me help him." I pushed her away, glad she was a little smaller than I was, and turned my attention back to her son. Between breaths, I saw her staring at me blankly. Then she dropped to her knees beside me crying. Moments later, the boy began breathing on his own, breathing and coughing and choking and throwing up and crying for his mother. If he can do all that, he was all right. I stepped back from him, feeling lightheaded, realizing what I had done. "He's alive," cried the woman. She grabbed him and nearly smothered him. "Oh, Rufus, baby." Rufus. Ugly name to inflict on a reasonably nice-looking child. When Rufus saw that, it was his mother who held him. He clung to her, screaming as loudly as he could. There was nothing wrong with his voice. Anyway, then suddenly, there was another voice. "What the devil's going on here?" A man's voice, angrily and demanding. I turned, startled, and found myself looking down the barrel of the longest rifle I could have ever seen. I heard a metallic click, and I froze, thinking I was going to be shot for saving a little boy's life. I was going to die.
Hello, thank you for coming out. I'm Jim Zarzana, and I'm going to read from one of my favorite sci-fi books, A Canticle for Leibowitz, and this is written by Walter M. Miller Jr., and I like this book so much that in the Marsko Saga, one of my main characters is Walter Miller, and I got the initial wrong. I think it's Walter C. Miller in the book. I dropped the junior, but anyway, so it's a very good book. So just a little set the stage. Well, I won't set the stage. You'll pick it up as I go. Brother Francis Gerald of Utah might never have discovered the blessed documents had it not been for the pilgrim with girded loins who appeared during the young novice's Lenten fast in the desert. Never before had Brother Francis actually seen a pilgrim with girded loins, but this one was the bona fide article. Brother Francis added a hasty prayer to St. Raoul the Cyclopsian, patron of the misborn, for protection against the saint's unhappy protege. For who did not know then that there were monsters in the earth in those days, a scattered population of adult monsters who often chose the remotest of deserted lands for their wanderings, where they prowled around at night around the campfires of prairie travelers. The pilgrim was a spindly old man with a staff, a basket hat, a bushy beard, and a wineskin slung over one shoulder. He was chewing and spitting with too much relish to be an aberration, and he seemed too frail and lame to be a successful practitioner of ogreism or highwaymanship. Seldom more than thrice annually did any layman or stranger travel the road that passed the abbey, in spite of the oasis which permitted the abbey's existence, and which would have made the monastery a natural inn for wayfarers, if the road were not a road from nowhere, leading nowhere. in terms of the modes of transportation in those times. Perhaps in earlier ages, the road had been a portion of the shortest route from the Great Salt Lake to Old El Paso. South of the Abbey, it intersected a similar strip of broken stone that stretched east and westward. That crossing was worn by time, but not by man of late. So Brother Gerald meets the pilgrim, and he really is a pilgrim. He really is. And Brother Gerald is building a stone hut for protection away from the abbey itself. And the pilgrim shows him a stone that would make a good capstone to make the roof. So Brother Gerald has to work to get that stone loose. His lever spontaneously leaped from his grasp, delivered a glancing blow to the side of his head, and disappeared in a sudden cave-in. The sharp blow sent him reeling. A flying stone from the rock slide struck him in the back, and he fell, gasping, uncertain whether or not he was falling into the pit, until the instant his belly hit solid ground and he hugged him. The roar of the rock fall was deafening but brief. On the wall of the stairwell where he fell, a half-buried sign remained legible. Muttering his modest command of pre-deluge English, he whispered the words haltingly: fallout, survival, shelter, maximum occupancy, 15. The rest was buried, but the first word was enough for Francis. He had never seen a fallout, and he hoped he would never see one. A consistent description of the monster had not survived, but Francis had heard the legends. Brother Francis visualized a fallout as half salamander, because according to tradition, the thing was born in the fire deluge, and half incubus, who despoiled virgins in their sleep. For were not the monsters of the world still called the children of fallout? The novice stared at the sign in dismay. Its meaning was plain enough. He had unwittingly broken into the abode, deserted, he hoped, and prayed, of not just one, but 15 of the dreadful beings. He groped for his vial of holy water. From the lightning and the tempest, deliver us, O Lord. From the scourge of the earthquake, deliver us, O Lord. From plague, famine, and war, deliver us, O Lord. From the place of ground zero, deliver us, O Lord. From the rain of cobalt, O Lord, deliver us. From the rain of strontium, O Lord, deliver us. From the fall of cesium, O Lord, deliver us. From the curse of fallout, O Lord, deliver us. From the begetting of monsters, O Lord, deliver us. From the curse of the misborn, O Lord, deliver us. So much.
Hi, I'm Kat Schmidt. I'm a theater major at SMC. And this book is it's like a short story within a series, so they call it a novella, kind of. It's that, and it's 4 stories that are intermingled, but there's 4 sections in the book, each focused on a different pair of people. It's set in medieval England. A memory. The doors opened of a dilapidated barn. Roland recognized it as the rickety structure on the northeast corner of the castle grounds. The sun swept past the doorway at about 6 o'clock on the summer evening, so Roland guessed by the golden light on the hay that it was nearly supper time, or the ever too brief stretch when Roland could persuade Rosalind to steal a few moments alone with him. Through the wide wooden doors, he saw 2 silhouettes huddled in a dark back corner. There, between the chicken feed and a rusty pile of sickles, Rosalind saw his earlier self. He barely recognized the boy he'd been. They were one and the same, and yet something made this boy
And then, as she watched the little blue launch itself, Menly screamed. No sooner had the blue emerged from the safety of the cliff than she saw the thin, writhing silver of thread descending. In a moment, the blue was covered with deadly filaments. It uttered one hideous shriek and disappeared. Dead? Certainly badly screwed. 2 more little fire lizards passed Menly, and she reacted now. No, you can't, you'll be killed! She flung herself across their path. The angry fire lizards pecked at her unprotected face, and while she covered herself, made their escape. She cried aloud when she heard their death screams. Don't let them go, she pleaded with the watching fire lizards. You're older. You know about thread. Tell them to stop. She half crawled, half ran to the rock where the golden queen was perched. Tell them not to go. There's thread out there. They're being killed. The queen looked at her, the many-faceted eyes whirling violently. The queen chuckled and chirped at her, and then crooned at yet another fledgling as it spread its wings and began to totter towards sure death. Please, little queen, do something. Stop them. The thrill of being witness to a hatching of fire lizards gave way to horror. Dragons had to be protected because they protected Pern. In Menly's fear and confusion, the little fire lizards were linked to their giant counterparts. She turned to the other lizards now, begging them to do something, at least until the threadfall was over. Desperately, she plunged back to the cave mouth and tried to turn the little fire lizards back with her hands, blocking their progress with her body. She was overwhelmed with pangs of hunger, belly-knotting, gut-twisting hunger. It took her only a moment to realize that the driving force in these fire lizards was that sort of hunger. That was what was sending them so senselessly forth to their deaths. They had to eat. She remembered that dragons had to eat too when they first hatched, fed by the boys they impressed. Menly wildly grabbed for her carry sack. With one hand, she snatched a fire lizard back from the entrance, and with the other, a spider claw crab from the sack. The little bronze screeched once and then bit the spider claw behind the eyes, neatly killing it. Wings beating, the bronze lifted free of Menly's grasp. With more strength than she could have thought it, the newborn creature flew its prey into a corner and began tearing it apart. Menly reached out randomly now, and with some surprise, found herself holding one queen in the clutch. She snagged 2 spider claws from the sack in her other hand and deposited them in the golden queen in another corner. Finally realizing she couldn't hand-feed the whole clutch, she upended the sack, spilling the shellfish out. Newly hatched fire lizards swarmed over after the spider claws. Menly caught 2 more lizards before they could reach the cave mouth and put them squarely in the center of their first meal. She was busy trying to make sure that each new fire lizard had a shellfish when she felt something pricking on her shoulder. Surprised, she looked up to find the little bronze clinging to her tunic. His round eyes were whirling, and he was still very hungry. She gave him an unclaimed spider claw and put him back in his corner. She tossed the little queen another and snared several other spider claws for her specials. Many more of the newly hatched got out, not with a source of food so nearby. She had a fair haul in the sack, but it didn't take long for the hungry fire lizards to devour every last morsel. The poor things were still sounding starved as they crewed about, tipping over claws and body shells, trying to find any scraps overlooked. But they stayed in the cave, and now the older fire lizards joined them, nuzzling and stroking, making affectionate noises. Utterly exhausted, Menly leaned back against the wall, watching their antics. At least they'd not all died. She glanced apprehensively at the entrance and saw no more writhing links of thread falling past. She peered further. There wasn't even a trace of the menacing gray fog on the horizon. The threadfall was over.
Hello, I am Emily Rose Rasmussen, a librarian here, and I'm going to read a slightly abridged segment from Life, the Universe, and Everything by Douglas Adams. This is the 3rd book in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, and our hero, Arthur Dent, who is an exceptionally ordinary Englishman from the late 20th century, after a series of misadventures in the previous 2 books, has been stranded on prehistoric Earth for 7 years. He and his friend, the intergalactic hitchhiker, Ford Prefect, who chose his name because he thought cars were the indigenous species, went their separate ways 4 years ago, and Arthur has just determined the best way to deal with the loneliness, frustration, and futility of his situation. "I will go mad," he announced. "Good idea," said Ford Prefect, clambering down from the rock on which he had been sitting. Arthur's brains somersaulted His jaw did push-ups. I went mad for a while, said Ford. Did me no end of good. Arthur's eyes did cartwheels. You see, said Ford. Where have you been? Interrupted Arthur, now that his head had finished working out. Around, said Ford, around and about. He grinned in what he accurately judged to be an infuriating manner. I just took my mind off the hook for a bit. I reckoned that if the world wanted me badly enough, it would call back. It did. He took out his now terribly battered and dilapidated satchel, and his sub-etha sensomatic. At least, he said, I think it did. This has been playing up a bit. He shook it. If it was a false alarm, I shall go mad, he said, again. Arthur shook his head and sat down. He looked up. I thought you must be dead, he said simply. So did I for a while, said Ford, and then I decided I was 11 for a couple of weeks. I kept myself amused all that time jumping in and out of a gin and tonic. Arthur cleared his throat and then did it again. Where, he said, did you find a gin and tonic? Said Ford brightly. Oh, I found a small lake that thought it was a gin and tonic and jumped in and out of that. At least I think I thought it thought it was a gin and tonic. I may, he added with a grin that would have sent sane men scampering for the trees, have been imagining it. He waited for a reaction from Arthur, but Arthur knew better than that. Carry on, he said evenly. Ford lowered his voice to a whisper. I have detected, he said, disturbances in the wash. He gazed keenly into the distance and looked as if he would quite like the wind to blow his hair back dramatically at that point. But the wind was busy fooling around with some leaves a little way off. Arthur asked him to repeat what he had just said because he hadn't quite understood his meaning. Ford repeated it. The wash? Said Arthur. The space-time wash, said Ford, and, as the wind blew briefly past at that moment, he bared his teeth into it. Arthur nodded, and then cleared his throat. Are we, he asked cautiously, talking about some sort of low-gone laundromat, or what are we talking about? At ease, said Ford, in the space-time continuum. Ah, nodded Arthur. Is he? Is he? He pushed his hands into the pockets of his dressing gown and looked knowledgeably into the distance. What? Said Ford. Who? Said Arthur. Is Eddie exactly, then? Ford looked angrily at him. Will you listen? He snapped. I have been listening, said Arthur, but I'm not sure it's helped. Ford grasped him by the lapels of his dressing gown and spoke as slowly and distinctly and patiently as if he were somebody from the telephone company accounts department. There seem, he said, to be some pools, he said, of instability, he said, in the fabric, he said. Arthur looked foolishly at the cloth of his dressing gown where Ford was holding it. Ford swept on before Arthur could turn the foolish look into a foolish remark. In the fabric of space-time, he said. Ah, that, said Arthur. Yes, that, confirmed Ford. They stood there alone, on a hill, in prehistoric Earth, and stared each other resolutely in the face. And it's done what? Said Arthur. It has, said Ford, developed pools of instability. Has it? Said Arthur, his eyes not wavering for a moment. It has, said Ford, with a similar degree of ocular immobility. Good, said Arthur. See? Said Ford. No, said Arthur. There was a quiet pause. The difficulty with this conversation, said Arthur, after a sort of ponderous look, had crawled slowly across his face like a mountaineer negotiating a tricky olive crop, is that it's very different from most of the ones I've had of late, which have mostly been with trees. They weren't like this, except perhaps some of the ones I've had with elms that got sort of bogged down. Arthur, said Ford. Hello, yes, said Arthur. Just believe everything I tell you and it will all be very, very simple. Well, I'm not sure I believe that. They sat down and composed their thoughts. Ford got out his sub-etha sensomatic It was making vague humming noises, and a tiny light on it was flickering faintly. Flat battery? Said Arthur. No, said Ford. There is a moving disturbance in the fabric of space-time. An eddy, a pool of instability, and it's somewhere in our vicinity. Where? Ford moved the device in a slow, lightly bobbing semicircle. Suddenly, the light flashed. There! Said Ford, shooting out his arm. There, behind that sofa! Arthur looked. Much to his surprise, there was a velvet paisley-covered Chesterfield sofa in the field in front of them. He boggled intelligently at it. Shrewd questions sprang into his mind. Why, he said, is there a sofa in that field? I told you, shouted Ford, leaping to his feet. Eddie's in the space-time continuum. And this is his sofa, is it? Asked Arthur, struggling to his feet and, he hoped, though not very optimistically, to his senses.
I'm last up tonight. I am reading from Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. If you don't know Neil Gaiman, a British author who's lived in the US for decades and has a singular imagination, I think, that is informed by his vast knowledge and love for literature and different types of mythologies. And Neverwhere fits the theme because it takes place in another place, London, and another world, because the London of this book is actually two Londons. It's London above, which is the London that I assume all of us would see if we were there, and London below, which is made up of the people who've fallen through the cracks of London above, and is sometimes literally below London, underneath London, in the underground tunnels and abandoned cars of the tube system, and sometimes within and among London above, but nobody in London above can see anyone from London below. And so the hero, if you want to call him that, of this book is Richard Mayhew, and he's an ordinary office worker in London with a nice fiance, and one day he encounters a young woman who is bleeding and decides to help her, and it turns out that she is the Lady Door from London below. And once he encounters her, nothing is ever quite the same for him. And so she has sent him to deliver a message in this scene that I am going to read. In this section I'm going to read. And if you're familiar with London, it's kind of fun to read the book and picture like where this is and the underneath parts. So, and because it's a British book, it seems to want to be read in British dialect, so if you'll bear with me, that's how I shall read it. It was late afternoon in central London, and with autumn drawing on, it was getting dark. Richard had taken the tube to Tottenham Court Road and was now walking west down Oxford Street, holding the piece of paper. Oxford Street was the retail hub of London, and even now the sidewalks were packed with shoppers and tourists. "It's a message," she said when she gave it to him, "from the Marquis de Carabas." Richard was sure he had heard the name before. "That's nice," he said. "Out of postcards, was he? This is quicker." He passed the lights and the noise of the Virgin Megastore and the shop that sold souvenir London police helmets and Little Red London buses, and the place next door that sold individual slices of pizza, and then he turned right. "You have to follow the directions written on here. Try not to let anyone follow you." Then she sighed and said, "I really shouldn't involve you this much. If I follow these directions, will it get you out of here faster?" "Yes." He turned into Hanway Street. Although he had taken only a few steps from the well-lit bustle of Oxford Street, he might have been in another city. Hanway Street was empty, forsaken, a narrow, dark road, little more than an alleyway, filled with gloomy record shops and closed restaurants, the only light spilling out from the secretive drinking clubs on the upper floors of buildings. He walked along it, feeling apprehensive. Turn right into Hanway Street, left into Hanway Place, then right again into Orme Passage. Stop at the first streetlight you come to. Are you sure this is right? Yes. He did not remember an Orme Passage, though he had been to Hanway Place before. There was an underground Indian restaurant there his friend Gary liked a lot. As far as Richard could remember, Hanway Place was a dead end. The Mandir, that was the restaurant. He passed the brightly lit front door, the restaurant steps leading invitingly down into the underground, and then he turned left. He had been wrong. There was an Orme Passage. He could see the sign for it high on the wall. Orme Passage W1. No wonder he hadn't noticed it before. It was scarcely more than a narrow alleyway between houses, lit by a sputtering gas jet. You don't see many of those anymore, thought Richard, and he held up his instructions to the gaslight, peering at them. Then turn around thrice. Widdershins? Widdershins means counterclockwise, Richard. He turned 3 times, feeling stupid. Look, why do I have to do all this just to see your friend? I mean, all this nonsense. It's not nonsense, really. Just humor me on this, okay? And she had smiled at him. He stopped turning, then he walked down the alley to the end. Nothing. No one. Just a metal garbage can, and behind it something that might have been a pile of rags. Hello, called Richard. Is anyone here? I'm Dawes' friend. Hello? No, there was no one there. Richard was relieved. Now he could go home and explain to the girl that nothing had happened. Then he would call in the appropriate authorities and they would sort it all out. He crumpled the paper into a tight roll and tossed it toward the bin. What Richard had taken for a pile of rags unfolded, expanded, stood up in one fluid motion. A hand caught the crumpled paper in midair. Mine, I believe, said the Marquis de Carabas. He wore a huge dandyish black coat that was not quite a frock coat, nor exactly a trench coat, and high black boots, and beneath his coat, raggedy clothes. His eyes burned white in an extremely dark face, and he grinned white teeth momentarily, as if at a private joke of his own, and bowed to Richard and said, De Carabas, at your service, and you are? Said Richard. You are Richard Mayhew, the young man who rescued our wounded Daw. How is she now? She's okay. Her arm's still a bit... Her recovery time will undoubtedly astonish us all. Her family had remarkable recuperative powers. It's a wonder anyone managed to kill them at all, isn't it? The man who called himself the Marquis de Carabas walked restlessly up and down the alley. Richard could already tell that he was the type of person who was always in motion, like a great cat. Somebody killed Dawes' family? Asked Richard. We're not going to get very far if you keep repeating everything I say, now are we? Said the Marquis. It was fun. I enjoyed reading and listening.
Thank you, everyone. Do have refreshments if you wish. Visit, there's no rush.
And thank you to all the readers.
Thank you.